Already. Good evening, everyone. So welcome to this meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. It's very good seeing everyone here. So my name's Councillor Tabby Joy. I'm the chair of the committee and very happy to be here. Happy New Year to everyone in attendance and watching online. So we are streaming this meeting live to the Cheltenham Borough Council YouTube channel. So if you ask a question at this meeting, then you will appear on the big screen behind me. You will be deemed to have consented to be filmed. Any possible use of those images and sound recordings could be used by us for training or broadcasting purposes. We're not expecting a fire alarm test tonight, so if the alarm sounds, please make your way to the nearest fire exit over there. It will not just be a drill. So let's crack on. So item number 1 is our apologies. So unfortunately, councillors Chandler, Gautier, Clamp and Holiday aren't able to be here this evening. We don't have any further apologies or substitutions for today, so excited to see them next time anyway. Item number 2 is any declarations of interest. So if any attending members have any interests that they need to declare, now's the opportunity to shout out about it. We all good? Cool. So happy to proceed to minutes of the last meeting, item 3. So this meeting was held on the 25th of November 2024. These minutes have been circulated with the agenda, so I'm not aware of any amendments, but does anyone have any suggestions of amendments they need to make? Okay, fair. I do want to acknowledge the fact that I was overtaken by a pretty bad chest infection in the last meeting and I had to bail out halfway through, which was really embarrassing, but Councillor Chelland did an amazing job of covering for me and just want to put on record my appreciation for her amazing work on doing that. So in the meantime, I will move that members approve the minutes of the meeting held on 25th of November. Or is everyone in attendance happy to sign off on that? Amazing, amazing. Thank you so much. I will sign those off as a true record. With me? Cool beans. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Where were we? All right. So moving on to item 4, public and member questions, calls for actions and petitions. I'm really excited for 2025 being the year that we get loads of these. So really, really welcome any of those from the public. And I'm kind of looking forward to maybe doing some democratic inclusion with those. It would be really useful to kind of like have more interest paid to overview and scrutiny because I'm very proud of the work that we do here. And I do think content is really exciting. So we're scheduled to have a cabinet briefing for item 5. So our leader, Councillor Hay, is here this evening. We were kind of quite keen, I think that we've spoken before about this, to learn about the household recycling centre, if there have been any potential updates on this, but anything that might be pertinent to our interests, it would be really good to hear from Councillor Hay. There any sort of key issues from cabinet members that might be useful to us that could inform our work plan would be really helpful. Councillor Hay, if you could take it away, please.
Thank you, Councillor Joy. It's been a busy few weeks. Apart from Christmas and New Year in between, because just before Christmas we had the government white paper, along with the very significant changes that are going to be happening in planning. So I've attended an awful lot of meetings, and the government made it clear that the devolution, it was in their manifesto, and true to their manifesto, they brought that forward. But what they've also done is brought forward local government reorganisation, which has come and gone in my lifetime over quite a number. And I think the last time it raised its head and there was serious discussion about it was back in 2020. So not that many years ago, but then nothing happened with it. But obviously it is moving at pace now. And I'm hoping that as things progress, I'll be able to bring either to this committee, or indeed this committee as well might want to have some sort of input. I mean, such as it is. I mean, it's very much, the government are very clear that whereas the previous government, it was that the county council would lead entirely on any local government reorganisation. This government has said that it must involve the districts in a proper fashion, a meaningful fashion, which is, going to take quite a bit of work with the number of different ideas of where and what might happen in terms of Gloucestershire, A, in terms of one unitary or two, and then B, of course, the wider, more strategic combined authority and where we look to. There are no decisions. There are some places that have been ruled out, but it is very much just work in progress. We won't know anything in terms of the county council elections until February, whether or not the Secretary of State grants a dispensation that the county council have requested, which was not supported by any of the district leaders except for Tewkesbury, who wished for the elections to go ahead, to be pulled, but the rest didn't. So we wrote a joint letter to the Secretary of State, signed cross-party, in terms of that, saying that we didn't believe that the election should be delayed. So with the inception or coming in the next 2 or 3 years of that of unitary and devolution, obviously that places Cheltenham. A lot of Cheltenham is not parished, and it's clear that parishes will have a bigger voice, although that's not clear quite what or how yet. But there are huge parts of Cheltenham that are not parished. So I'm looking at, and I will be setting up a cabinet working group, just 4 or 5 people, to include myself, on looking at the options of what a town council might look like and what we might want to try and retain, and therefore what income. Just because it's very important that the bigger, everybody knows that the bigger the authority there is the less it is about local impact. So we need to make sure that we've got a town council that's ready for the future, that's ready to be there for our residents in a very local way. It won't have the same powers, but I think it's really clear that what we also need to just think about and remember, importantly remember, is that there won't be a county council, there won't be district or borough councils. It will be a new council completely with differing powers. I think that's, I was going to say that doesn't seem like very much of a briefing, but actually I've lost count of how many meetings I've sat in and briefings and things, but I hope that was useful.
That's genuinely really useful, because I was actually going to ask if there was a potential future for a Cheltenham Town Council specifically, because I am also very conscious of the unparished areas. I myself represent an unparished ward. So actually, if anyone does happen to have any questions that filter into your current understanding of how things are, you'd be very welcome. Councillor Allen, if you want to go ahead.
Thank you very much for the briefing. Just a few questions that come to mind. Firstly, why did Tewkesbury decide to support the move to delay the elections?
I think, Councillor Allen, I wouldn't really want to speak for Tewkesbury. I think if you want to ask that question, you need to ask that of the leader of Tewkesbury Council. He had his very good reasons.
Okay, thank you. And the second question is, how's progress going with the talks to combine Gloucestershire with a strategic authority, and is there any discussion about potentially splitting Gloucestershire? I know that, for example, other parties have expressed support for splitting Gloucestershire. I just want to know if this is something that's being discussed currently.
I missed some of that, Councillor Allen. I'm really sorry.
Sure, yeah. So just 2 parts to the question. Firstly, how are talks going in general regarding the strategic authority, and which partners we may be looking to ally with? And secondly, are there any talks of splitting the Gloucestershire council, if you will, into 2 separate councils? I know other parties have expressed support for this.
If I heard you right, do you mean 2 unitaries within Gloucestershire and then the strategic? Yes, there are discussions. There has been discussions. Some people would prefer that option because, again, it keeps the local, keeps it a bit more local. But others believe that 1 unitary is the right way to go. So those discussions are ongoing. It is really early doors. We only had, as Leadership Gloucestershire, our first meeting last week to even talk about it. So, you know, officers now have been tasked with going ahead. I think, and so in terms of discussions, I know back in 2020, I wasn't leader then, but I was very keen that we were sort of leading or really highly involved in the then discussions, and with the potential strategic authorities. There are places that we can go, but a lot of people are ahead of us in terms of timing, because there was no, put it this way, I was probably one of the few that said we need to be having those discussions before the white paper, but the majority wanted to wait until the white paper came out. My view was, and this is my personal view, was that actually the writing was on the wall. Let's start those negotiations so that we get the widest spread of where we could look to. There are differing opinions of which way, and there's some very clear. We're highly unlikely. We haven't asked to be, or the County Council haven't asked to be on the priority list, and we're not likely to be, because we had to have some toe in the door in terms of discussions that were already happening that other counties have got. So those that are looking to join the new Wessex, for example, you know, they will be on the priority list because they're already on that journey. So for us, it's, you know, I mean, at the moment, where we sit is very much, as I see it, our economic driver is towards Wecker and Baines, North Somerset. That's our economic driver, particularly given Cheltenham's position in terms of the world of cyber and security.
Thank you so much for that. Do we have any other further questions at this time that we need to ask Councillor Hay? Okay, that's really cool. Thank you so much for being here today and just asking and answering questions, because I think that we've had an update from our CBC CEO that we're probably not going to see any, even on a fast track, probably not going to see any major changes at Cheltenham until around 2027. And that's at like the most, you know, radical change of pace. So in some ways, like, this is context for what we're going to be moving towards. I do really, really welcome any inclusion that ONS might be able to offer in terms of sort of seeing what we need, you know, what we need to prioritise in terms of preserving for any kind of unitary shifts. But it will definitely it will take a long time to get on board with all of it. So thank you for all that you're doing. Is there anything you'd like to close off with?
One thing I think that is a really important fact. We've got a lot happening, as you rightly say, Councillor Joy. Nothing, you know, nothing's going to happen before 2027 in massive change. But it's a huge work stream, and given that that's another 2 years at least away, the thing for me, and I had that discussion with the officers, was to give a clear steer of the fact that this is business as usual. We've got a huge agenda. We've got some really important projects, and we can't take our eye off the ball in terms of delivering those projects. So I've been really clear on that steer, business as usual, drive through some of our existing projects, but also, you know, there's an acknowledgement that this sort of reorganisation is not going to come without a cost, but not just a monetary cost, but also a capacity cost. So, you know, for example, sort of looking at the options of setting up a town council, you know, to keep the day job going, we don't have the resource. So we're going to have to get some resource in to support that process. But it's really important that that process runs alongside the devolution conversation, the town council conversation, and business as usual. And that's been my message, is that it's those three that are critical for us.
It's kind of wild how we'll have some like separate like work streams, and we'll have some that are deeply integrated with one another. Like and in some ways, the fact that we've already been through a process in miniature almost of bringing our social housing back in house as well. Like I'm feeling pretty confident with the working group that we've had here that we'll have some lessons that we're learning from that as well that we can kind of bring into bearing in mind. Councillor Allen, did you have anything further, Joe?
Sorry, just one quick question as well. What is happening with the strategic local plan, given no major changes are proposed until 2027?
That is very much going ahead. That nothing will change that. Obviously, from the planning rules that have the new planning regulations that are coming in, there's bits of work that will have to have more work done to them, particularly in terms of the fact that we were at 4.57 of our meeting our housing needs number, and that's dropped to 2.47, I think it is. I know it's 2 point something. I'm pretty sure it was 4.57 and 2.47. So obviously that means we're way off the mark, and that means that we then have to allocate and look at the fact that when it comes to affordable housing, we're set at 40% is our ask, and that now means that we will have to be looking at 50%. So there's some significant work to be done, and the introduction of the grey belt. So all of that will have an impact on the pace at which the SLP moves, but that is still moving forward.
Thank you so much. That's really helpful. So we're all good with questions and we can close this discussion. Are we happy with that? I mean, we'll probably be in touch, like in the intervening, if there's any matters of urgency coming up. Otherwise, we have our next meeting in February, so we can always check in again, and we'll probably be, hopefully, better, more informed by that time as well. So I'm very conscious that these negotiations continue at a pace, so we'll be keeping a close eye on it. Thank you so much. It's been really helpful. So item number 6 is matters referred to committee, which I don't believe we have any. Because we've basically managed to tie things up with the CBH transfer now, so we're kind of quite sort of sorted in terms of that at the moment. So I'd like to invite item 7 with feedback from other scrutiny meetings attended. I'd really like to welcome Councillor Bamford, who's been at the Gloucestershire Health ONS Committee. I think there was a meeting on this 26th of November 2024. Would you be okay to present that to the ONS committee here, please, because we really value your contributions. Thank you.
Thanks, Tabby. Just by way of a little bit of background, I joined the NHS in the mid-1980s when we were very much the envy of the rest of the world. We provided a service that was very high standards, fantastic coverage, unlike most of the rest of the world, at a price that others simply couldn't believe. So that's where we were. By the time I retired 6 or 7 years ago, things had got a whole lot worse. I don't think it was entirely down to me. I think what had happened over that period was that successive governments, including those of a persuasion that you might think would have behaved otherwise, failed to invest at the rate of health service inflation. We had 1 or 2, well, that's a slight exaggeration, probably 4 years during the Blair years when health service inflation was matched. Every other single year in that period, we were significantly below health service inflation. So year on year on year, you're effectively cutting the service. I mean, I'm sure you're very familiar with it in the local government context, but that's I think it's worth noting that when we talk about health services. And against that background, you had an aging population. You had fantastic advances in what was possible in the health world. Public expectation had gone through the roof in many ways. So, for instance, in these papers, you'll see that over a period of 4 years, the requirement to provide MRI scans had doubled. I can remember in the early 2000s, I was in charge of I had a role to play in the oncology department, which saw me observe the fact that we were giving 25% more chemotherapy for 4 years in a row, and it continued to go after that. But if you can imagine that, that's you're doubling your service in just 4 years with no extra money. Now, if you think of the refuse service here, if we actually, I don't know how many properties we service for our refuse in Cheltenham, but if in 4 years' time we had to service double with no extra money, we'd cry foul, I think. And I think that just, that's a bit of background to where we are in the NHS. And it's not, I know the acute sector. I think you'll find that most other sectors in the health world would say they faced exactly the same issues. So when we come to moan about the number of ambulances queuing and moan about the fact that we can't access services in the way that we want to, or actually, feel we have a right to, that is the context of the last period. And just before I come on specifically to the report, obviously I had a long period of actually working there, so I am very familiar with the operational management issues. But on HOSC, I am a scrutineer as you are here. So I'm asking questions of the operational team, and that's what I'm reflecting in this report. What answers I might got, not just me, people like Paul Hodgkinson do a fantastic job, and a lot of other councillors in asking some very pertinent questions. But as I say, please do bear in mind the background when you see the responses, and possibly some of which you might consider inadequate. Anyway, moving specifically on, the last meeting we had a report into how the health community was attempting to deal with the fact that there are more and more elderly people in frail conditions needing a huge range of health services, highly acute, but also right down to some very basic living stuff. And as has been the case over much of the last couple of decades, the investment, such as there is focused on care in the community, keeping people at home. And I'm sure if we were a patient in that circumstance, a recipient, we would want all those resources piled into trying to enable us to stay at home. The downside of that is the ambulances you see queuing. The fact that we have not got enough acute beds in this county. We closed Delancey in 2007. That's 110 beds went down the Swanee at that point. We've never got back to a bed base that has enabled us to actually function well. That's to some extent that's a choice. We've chosen to invest in community services, much needed and much loved, and even so, I don't think there's enough of them to keep people at home in ways they could. However, there are certain very good innovations that I think I mentioned here. Virtual wards with the care teams, consultants, nurse specialists and so forth, online, and finding out what conditions people are living in and helping address their issues. Now, it certainly feels like a good initiative. I am slightly concerned about the recipient and how well they will be able to, to access that. But I think it's a very good concept and something we need to do a lot more of, because the reality is we just simply can't get enough health professionals out to the patient. And if it means doing it virtually, that's got to be a good thing. And as I say, I don't think we're going to suddenly find anytime soon another replacement to Delancey Hospital. So, I applaud what's going on here. It's frankly, it's scratching the surface of real need. Any questions on that before I move on to the performance aspects?
Does anyone have any questions? You're very welcome to raise them now if you wish. Cool. Yeah, go ahead if you want to.
Okay, so each meeting we get a 30 or 40 pages of stats as to how we are doing as a health community. I've highlighted here the issues with diagnostics. I mentioned the sort of growth that there is in those areas. And I think there's actually quite a good news story in Gloucestershire, in that we've just opened the new diagnostic centre in Gloucester Quays. We're fortunate in having a charity/private sector cobalt unit that provides an awful lot of scanning facilities. I think probably, compared with other areas, we're relatively well off, which doesn't mean that we're not still hard pressed to provide the scans that clinicians now require to maximise their management of patients. And one of the problems, most of the bits of kit are very expensive and have a relatively short shelf life, because you find there's a more modern bit of kit that can do that much more, only a few years down the line. And actually replacing and upgrading is it's no doubt a massive issue, which we face here, don't we, with trying to maintain our own assets. So it's familiar in the public sector, but it's very acute in this sector. And all I would say is that I think diagnostically we're not doing too bad as a county. Could do better, maybe. We all know the problems with A&E and ambulance waiting times. I won't rehearse those. All I would say is the time I've been on HOSC, there have been numerous initiatives, and the problem has not gone away, I think, for a lot of the reasons that I described in my introduction. Just to stand still requires a huge amount of effort and investment. And I, for one, if anybody if you fall ill, if your relative falls ill, don't wait for an ambulance. Get in the car and go and present yourself to A&E. And that's a horrible thing to say, really. But I just, it's kind of, you will wait for a long time for an ambulance because they're so tied up. So anyway, that's where we are. Those ambulance waiting times, particularly this time of year, are on the face of it horrendous. But I don't think you can be too critical of SWAST, given what they're faced with. Elective waits, I think we know that's well rehearsed in the press as well, isn't it? The over 2 year and over 1 year waits have actually significantly improved over the last year, 18 months. Don't give the last government credit for much, but I think there were some useful initiatives in that regard. And some of those really, really long waiters, there's been a decent reduction. However, the figure for over 18-week waits, which is the standard, have shown absolutely no sign of improvement. And I would say they're actually steadily getting worse. So I wish the current government well in tackling that problem. I do think it is the 7.5 million, which is the national figure for the number of people on the waiting list, is, in my view, a significant underestimate, because there's a whole load of people who will simply not be seeing the health team that will put them or refer them, because people know there is no prospect of getting things sorted out. Medical teams won't put people on waiting lists if they think it's too far distant to know whether or not those people will be fit for surgery. So 7.5 is an underestimate of the real problem. So it is, getting a handle on that will be a massive task for the health services and the government in the over the coming 5 years. I hope that's one thing that did improve significantly under the last Labour government. Elective weights did come down quite a lot. So I'm hoping they're able to perform some miracles there. The one I really would like to highlight is the cancer 62-day wait target. Again, it's been scruffing along at a really poor rate, which is a lot worse than when I left the health service 6 or 7 years ago. And if you're waiting more than 62 days for treatment, the chances are there is some clinical impact of that. If you're waiting for hip replacement, you've got to argue, well, actually, the patient is in pain, which is bad, but in the end result may be as good as if you'd had no wait at all. If you've had to wait for cancer treatment for more than that standard time, in a number of cases, it will represent harm. It's not a local problem, as I'm sure you're all aware. It's a national problem. But what we've tried to tease out in HOSC, we get reports of the figures. We don't actually get a report on what harm has happened as a result. I feel I would like that, and that's something that we are pressing hard for. I probably said enough.
That's really helpful, thank you. So are you saying that you're kind of still awaiting a report on harms as a result of delays with cancer treatment?
Yes, and I would say that we have asked. It's not. Yes, get it. It's a very difficult report to write. I appreciate. To get it's it's difficult to evaluate, and B, it's very difficult to compile because you're talking about, in most specialties, have some cancer patients within them, and then you're talking about a clinical judgment. So it's not easy, but I do think it's very important that it isn't just a figure. It's actually so we're aware that, because for me, I suppose, if I'm expressing a bias here, if you're going to throw money at the health service, and I'm not convinced money is being thrown, but if you are, do you focus on elective care? Do you focus on, urgent care or cancer care? That it's a difficult one, and I'm not convinced there's the right information out there for people to make that judgment. So I would press the health community to have that information available.
Do you have any particular recommendations for CBC within things? I mean, this is, obviously not a question you may be in a position to answer, but did you identify recommendations among other district councils that we may be able to integrate into any of our strategy going ahead, or anything that would be usefully conducted in terms of potentially having a unitary at a later date?
Well, obviously social services and health are intimately linked. As a unitary, we will be the social service provider. And I'd also say that I think housing is pretty closely linked. So, if you're not providing decent housing, you're sending people out of hospital and they're just going to be bouncing back into health service somewhere else. So, it's not just the health services that aren't funded properly to keep people healthy. It's the whole of the public sector, in my humble opinion.
Thank you so much. Does anyone have any questions on the item? Go ahead, Councillor Day, thank you. And then Councillor Challen.
Councillor Bamford, I'd just like to thank you again for another very comprehensive and I think very objective report. I know you're very passionate about this area, but try and always call it fairly. Given since the meeting you're reporting on, we've got terrible winter pressures from flu, etc. Do you see any glimmer of a light at the end of the tunnel or not?
Well, the it used to be the case around the 4th, 5th January. We called it the granny dumping week, which is a slightly unfortunate term. It was, well, the terminology is obvious, isn't it? The problem used to be for 1 or 2 weeks. That is long since changed. It went to a few months, and now it's virtually a year-round standard of time of escalation. We used to call it a major incident. Well, we had to stop doing that because you can't be in a major incident situation all the time, can you? I think the most recent terminology is Opal 1, 2, 3, and 4. I'm not quite sure what Opal stands for, but you're in an escalation level like that, and it went. The health community or the acute sector went beyond Opal 4 2 weeks ago and declared a critical incident. So and I suppose the only glimmer is that critical incident is thought to be coming to an end. As that's just as of today, I'm reading the update. So the flu numbers are still going like that, and that's pretty terrifying. Which is why I say, don't get ill. I hope that answers to some extent.
Councillor Chan and then Councillor Penninger.
Thank you. Yeah, I was interested in the Evita birthing unit, and you mentioned that the midwifery numbers seem to be increasing, and clearly that gives hope that it will be reopened. There's quite a lot of cynicism about whether or not it will be. There's a lot of to and fro. I mean, what are your thoughts, Councillor Bamford, about the motivation to open it? Is it just, oh no, there'll always be a good excuse why not to reopen it, or is there something more positive than that?
Well, unless folks have changed an awful lot in the last 7 years, the one thing you really want to do if you're managing health services is provide them. So, and Evita is a well-liked service, and my own view is that if there was a way of providing that service safely, it would happen. Now, we've had conversations pretty much every HOSC around this, and it's very difficult to get what you'd call a straight answer. The number of the suggestion in the recent report was that the number had substantially improved. That's not, I think, a universally held view. Whether that came from the provider trust, I'm not entirely sure. And my own experience of vacancies in the health world is that virtually everywhere you look, there's a hell of a lot of vacancies, particularly in the nurse/midwifery zone. And conditions have not changed that much. You know, the conditions of work are very poor. The conditions of pay are pretty poor. Recruitment isn't easy. Actually, more than recruitment, it's probably retention that's the big issue. Now, on top of that, in maternity, the trust has got issues with CQC report, which will indicate that improvement is required. And there is a report that will be issued very shortly, which won't make for great reading. And I think the problem with that, with respect to Evita, is that, for me, the prime consideration when you're talking about a birthing service is providing something that is absolutely as safe as possible. When I was involved in that, which is now 30 years ago, one thing, the outcome you want is for both mother and baby to have as safe a delivery as possible, so if there are concerns about a service that is focused as fully as it can be on one site, the idea that you can then try and provide it on 2 or 3 sites, if we consider Stroud, I think that puts it farther away rather than nearer. So if I was a gambling man, I would not put money on Vita opening in the next 18 months. I think there is a will to get it open. I don't think it's going to happen too quickly, unfortunately.
So taking a question from Councillor Pinniger. Councillor Beale, did you have another question?
Yeah,
Because we're running slightly behind on schedule. I just want to make sure that we finish on time. Do we have? Well, are we okay to keep questions and answers relatively brief if we include Councillor Pinniger and Councillor Beale, please? If that's all right.
should be a relatively short one.
Oh, okay, that's good to hear. I just want to make sure that it's both inclusive and to time.
Is it me? Okay. Okay. Yes, I think it's more about this council has previously tried to, well, has written to the HOSC and said, we need you to do something about this, which is futile. What we need to be looking at is what the districts, what this council can do to support the NHS. And there is quite a lot going on in the communities. We have sort of community health and wellbeing people. And the example I'm thinking of is there's now a blood pressure monitor at the Springbank Centre. So people, and a couple of people have been caught with high blood pressure and referred. So this kind of thing is really useful. I'm wondering if, I guess you're not the person to ask, but I believe we should be pushing to enable more of that as a council. And then, because this is a massive issue for our residents. I mean, surely it's like the top issue for a lot of residents.
Can you hear me? Yes, you hear me. Do you want me? Yeah.
So look, I think it's kind of a self-help model, isn't it, really, that you're talking about there? I think it's a really, really good idea. I think if you look at the European model, there's a lot less focus on, well, there's a lot more focus, I think, on caring in the community. In many European countries, they would expect to provide care, not necessarily with the initiative you're talking about, but I think it's similar. So I think as a country, we will never get the health service or outcomes that we seek without doing an awful lot more ourselves, if that makes sense. So anything that any community can do, I think, is really, really good and very, very helpful.
Thank you. I'm curious. I've had personally, I've had 4 people in my own family recently die in the last 2 years of cancer. Has with all this pressure on the NHS, is there a change to the survival rate of cancer with all the pressure on it?
Well, if you look, mostly survival rates look very positive, but I think that's partly because there are much better treatments available, and that doesn't mean that for individuals are receiving all that they might, if that makes sense, and that's the purpose of the questions at HOSC, because I think you will find within those over 62-day waiters, and indeed it's not just 62. Some cancers are very, very fast growing, and within 62 days, you can be talking about potentially worse outcomes. So treatment as quickly as possible. And yes, I think what has changed is that services have. I described the fact that chemotherapy was going up at 25% a year, and services were really struggling to keep chemotherapy timely when they were faced with that sort of growth in demand. And we've got immunotherapy now going through the roof, and there's something called cell therapy, which I don't even think I know what it is. But there are always these new things, which mean probably that outcomes will continue to look better. But that doesn't mean, as an individual, you're necessarily getting what you need at the time you need, and that's I think that's what HOSC needs to do is to keep at those making the decisions as to where resource is allocated to make sure. I would argue that cancer should be absolutely a priority because people do die. You don't tend to die of a knee that needs replacing. I know it's horrible because people can be in terrible pain, but it's priorities.
Thank you so much. That's been super informative. So what would be really useful is if you're able to, maybe at your next meeting, if you're able to learn if there could be anything that district councils could take on or incorporate into, we'd be following Councillor Pillinger's suggestion. We'd be interested in kind of like performing a more integrated role. So if they have any recommendations for that, we would be quite interested in like having some discussion on it by the sounds of it. So thank you so much for all of that. That was super informative. Thank you so much, and thank you for all your questions. I really appreciate it.
We already do loads of stuff like health and wellbeing grants and stuff, so we could always share that information with the committee if people find it useful.
Oh, that's really cool. Can I say that now?
If you want to.
Cool. So actually Claire has raised to my attention that we already do a bunch of things. So actually if we wanted to do an information session just to kind of go over what we already have, it may be good for avoiding double handling. It's possible that we in Cheltenham may be doing things that other districts could adopt as well. So just kind of having a more, again, that integration and just ensuring that we're actually well informed about it. The fact that we're talking to our residents all the time, and if we could alert them to local services as well, I for one would be super interested in that. So yeah, that'd be really cool if we could arrange a briefing at some point. Is it okay to add that onto the minutes that we'd be interested? That would be class. Thank you so much. That's amazing. Thanks so much. I'm really glad we had this discussion. Cool. So moving swiftly on because we are running slightly behind time, as I raised before. Sorry. So item number 8 is the Golden Valley Social Value Strategy, which I'm really, really excited about. And thank you so much for coming today. It's really, really good to see you about this. So our objective tonight is understanding the delivery of social value with the Golden Valley development. So I'd really like to welcome Paul Minnis, who's our Director of Major Development and Regeneration, and Amy Keats. Is it Keats? Okay, that's amazing. Cool. Who's our construction project manager, and Richard King, who is our head of construction. So thank you so much for all the work that you've been doing on this so far, and thank you for the report you've sent. You don't necessarily need to do a summary of the report because, as far as I can see, loads of people have read through it and asked some really great questions. Just to kick off, the questions and answers that you have raised and then received, do you have, I'm thinking particularly of Councillor Chell and Councillor Day here, who asked a wide array. Do you have any follow-ups that you'd like to add? Okay, that's amazing. But genuinely, we really, really welcome having some input into this and sort of learning more about what you're doing. So does anyone have any questions that they'd like to ask to kick off discussions? Councillor Allen, go ahead. Thank you.
Firstly, just want to say this is a fantastic report. It's really good to see major developments take on such a huge role in providing social value with the developments they bring. I work in planning myself, so it's fantastic to see these sort of things come forward from large-scale developments. There are a few points I did want to pick up on, though. 2 points in particular. First one is in relation to your fourth principle regarding safety. I think this is absolutely crucial. I think measures that can be taken to help improve safety in new developments are essential, but I am wondering if there is potentially a lack of actions around this. I know, for example, in your response to Councillor Chellan, that you noted, well-lit cycle paths and so on, and that you've had reference to the NCLB report, or at least have had sight of it. But it'd be good to know if there are any further actions that you're proposing around safety, particularly in relation to reducing crime or any potential crime. And the second question is around traffic minimisation efforts. Now, I know there's a strong focus on environmental sustainability, and that's very good, it's laudable. In fact, that so much is being considered. But I am quite shocked that the effects of construction traffic haven't really been taken into account, given that construction traffic can perhaps provide some of the largest CO2 emissions in the development phase of the Golden Valley. But we would be very interested to hear your thoughts on both those. Thank you.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for your question and thank you for the feedback on the report. That's really good to hear. In terms of safety, I think that's a really good point to pick up. And obviously our social value does cover the safety aspect to ensure that we are highlighting it and we are putting the spotlight to ensure that we are considering this. Now, obviously this is a working draft, so I just want to highlight that to say there's a lot of detail behind this that needs to be drawn out over the next couple of years, over the next 12 months in particular. And I think safety is really important one. Like you've picked up, we have picked up certain elements, but there's certainly more depth that needs to be brought out of that. So I suppose in terms of construction, we will obviously be working very closely with our construction company to pick up those construction points. But obviously we have the head of construction here, Richard King, who will pick that up a bit further in answering that question. But I think safety is extremely important for when phase one, the innovation centre, has been completed. Things like well-lit paths, things like potentially having on-site patrol, particularly in the evenings. I mean, these are a lot of questions and queries that we haven't yet got the answers to, and that will be drawn out over the next 12 to 18 months. So whether we come back with a bit more of a clearer idea of how we're going to address those safety issues, I think it's probably a better way of dealing with it than trying to answer it now, if that's okay.
Do we have any?
Construction traffic question, I think Richard can
Oh,
answer.
yeah, please go ahead. Sorry, I got overexcited.
Hi. Construction traffic's inevitable with greenfield or any development. We need to get people, and the contractor needs to get people and materials and plant, excavators and the like to the site. But a few things that we can do, and we are working with the team to try and minimise the impact, is to ensure that construction traffic goes through predefined routes, so we don't get particularly larger vehicles or hopefully any vehicles wandering off into some of the real suburban areas and some of the rabbit warrens and you see on the media where lorries get stuck. Secondly is agreeing good logistics plans with the contractor, the successful contractor, to make sure that vehicles can get onto the site easily. They can turn around if they're large vehicles and leave the site facing the right direction. It's safer that way. And obviously that there's suitable parking facilities or unloading facilities. Parking will not be permitted off of the site for obvious reasons. We all know that parking is currently an issue on site, and also making sure that the contractor provides all the facilities that people who are going to be working on the construction site have, that they're provided within the site. So during the day, hopefully, to and fro will be reduced. The other item that we are drafting into the HBD are drafting into the documentation is really promoting the use of more local suppliers for the project. As you can imagine, it's a very large project. There isn't enough skills locally and enough contractors of suitable size and capability, very local. But what we're putting in as a KPI is a 30-mile radius from the site, so that we can try and promote the use of local people, local suppliers as much as possible. That said, some materials will be travelling further afield, but trying to really limit the amount of transport used to get people and materials to and from the site.
I just want to say thank you very much for the answers. That was very thorough, very appreciated. And also just to emphasise that the emphasis on local support and supply chains is a great part of this social value strategy. So just wanted to emphasise that again. Thank you.
Amazing, thanks so much. So Councillor Pinniger and Councillor Chelin, does anyone else want to register an interest in asking a question? Councillor Day next. So Pinniger, Chelin and Day, thank you.
Hello. I like the report a lot. I didn't actually have any questions initially because it seems to cover everything, and some of the areas where I would have questions are still not worked out. You've got work to do over time, but just triggered by what Councillor Frank was saying. I was thinking back to when I arrived in Cheltenham and walking around the area near GCHQ. There's a lot of petty crime, low-level ASB, around literally the highest security building in the country. And this contradiction. It's weird. It's slightly strange. And now we're going to build a cyber centre, which will have a lot of cyber security in it. We'll have army officers walking in and out, maybe, and we'll have all of those kind of the hoi polloi, all of that kind of thing going on, walking through neighbourhoods with petty crime, ASB, over the border from what you're doing. Obviously, your bit be beautiful, but I just wanted to know if you can imagine or envisage a better linkage between the high security side, the sites, and the community. That I'm sure it's probably all in here, but bringing that sort of safety and low crime and good behaviour. So there's more of a gradient rather than stepping outside of one and then it just being like the Bronx in the 1970s.
Thank you for your question. So the vision is, and this is why we've put so much kind of time and effort into the social value strategy, is that we want this new development to be an extension of West Cheltenham, but at the same time enhance the local communities as well. So our ambition is to try and improve those communities through lots of different initiatives. So for instance, we want our contractors, our successful contractors, to go out to the local schools and give talks to local children on the opportunities within the construction industry that they probably won't be aware of. And that's including girls and boys, inspire those children and really get them excited for something on their doorstep. And also to have those role models come into schools regularly. So as part of our tender, we have got one of the KPIs for them to go to schools. I think it's 5 to 10 times within the construction phase 1 to local schools to deliver those talks. And that actually does have a really big impact on children to see it on their doorstep. We're also thinking about doing community talks for the contractors, kind of having those open night kind of sessions, drop in from 6 to 8 p.m, meet the site manager, meet the project manager, talk about what's going on, find out what's happening, and try and really elevate kind of the conversations, the education. So there's so many things that we can do as part of this development to improve the area, and we will be building kind of beautiful landscapes, walkways, sports provision, or that will have access for all local communities. And there's also different initiatives that we have spoke about that, potentially given priority to opportunities for work in terms of, those jobs that would be required for security, receptionists, those kind of entry-level jobs for the local community, given priority to local postcodes. So we are really thinking about the bigger picture and having a long-lasting impact and a long-lasting legacy, because we're all very passionate about this project. We really do want to make a really good impact for the local communities, because we go around there quite often to the site and we see the communities there. And obviously we've had a 3-month commissioned community engagement project that Plexor have delivered for us, and they actually went out to the local community groups like Springbank Community Group, Hester's Way, and asked them, gave them a bit of a talk about what can we do, how can we support you, how can we make it better? And there was loads of good feedback of what we could actually do. So, we actually want to try and enhance those areas and work with them. So hopefully that answers your question. Okay.
Just to briefly use my chair's powers for evil, otherwise I'm going to go straight for Councillor Chellan afterwards. But are you going to have apprenticeship schemes and work experience placements included in that? Because one-off talks can be really, really useful, but some of the more enduring relationships kind of go over like more extended work. Is that something that you're considering as well?
Yeah, absolutely. That is actually a really big part of our tender, is to have apprenticeships. And we've actually already been starting to build our relationship with the Construction College in Cheltenham. That's recently opened last September, to ensure we've got those links, those relationships already built. And part of the tender kind of application is to say to our contractors, how are you going to incorporate apprenticeships, T-levels, work experience? It goes beyond apprenticeships. There's lots of different ways that we can involve young people and people of all ages and abilities into the development.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Councillor Chellin and then Councillor Day. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, there's loads of social value. There's lots going on in West Cheltenham for very, very good reasons, and there's going to be a lot of economic impact as well. And I'm just interested in the communication and public relations bit. I mean, you're talking about sharing success stories and positive updates, and I know you've done masses of promotion and information out to the whole of Cheltenham, but I was a bit surprised when somebody referred to it, somebody who lives more in the centre of Cheltenham, as a vanity project out west of Cheltenham, and I just wanted to share that because I know how hard everybody's working, but we really need to make sure that we get the messages out as much as possible across Cheltenham. That was partly behind one of the questions I asked in terms of which other people in Cheltenham would be particularly benefiting, but I think just to make that maybe a bit clearer, and I know you're working on that, but I mean, I was slightly gobsmacked by that, but that's what somebody said, and I thought it might be useful, if a bit awful, to share it.
Thanks for sharing, Councillor Chellin, on that point. And I think one of the things we've been trying to do over the last year is to bring our comms and marketing team more in line with the scheme in terms of its wider benefits, not just locally, and something our cabinet lead has picked up, that wider Cheltenham piece as well, in terms of making sure that the benefits community and right across Cheltenham are recognised. And the comms and marketing team also sit on the social value team meetings as well. So we hope to get those messages across so that, but it's good and it's not good to get the feedback, if you see what I mean. But thanks for raising it with us, and it's something we're very much working on to change perceptions so it doesn't appear to be that vanity project to many people at all. Thanks.
Thank you. And Councillor Day, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for your report, which I think contains lots of excellent and very exciting stuff. Certainly gets me excited about what this can achieve. I was just thinking that the vision and the legacy of these objectives will be much more fulfilled and easier to fulfill with a stable, long-term tenant base, once everything's up and running. And so I just wondered if any thought has been given, or there are any ideas over a kind of like what would be a minimum lease period that we'd be looking for tenants to take. Because to me, the longer, those periods, the greater positive impact there will be. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Day, for that question. Yeah, I think lease negotiations, as you can imagine, are driven by effectively market forces, and there's only so much we can do on that front. Lease lengths, certainly in my time in the property profession, have come down quite a lot from the old traditional 25-year leases with 5-year rent reviews down to more like 10 years, sometimes 5 years, sometimes even more flexible terms than that. However, some of the occupiers we are talking to at the moment are also making quite a commitment to this scheme as well, or proposing to, so they will want a relatively long lease. So it's getting that balance. There are some, of course, tenants we're likely to get will be from probably the more start-up or scale-up communities in that cyber and security sectors. And some of those companies don't exist today. Some of them will morph into other companies. So it will be a mix. But obviously from I guess, an investment return for the council point of view as well, we'll seek to get the best lease lengths we can, whilst at the same time having to allow that flexibility so we get that broad range of tenants, not just large corporates or government organisations, but right down through maybe academic organisations who will be on a different basis. And then, as I said, smaller scale startup, scale up tenants as well, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Is there anyone who'd like to ask any further questions who I might have been neglecting before? We all good? Because genuinely, like, I'm feeling kind of quite positive about this project, like the capacity and scope for it. Like, I understand that it's going to be quite iterative, but I'm particularly, I really wanted to appreciate the KPIs that you've included at the end, so you can recognise any success that has been realised so far, and kind of as we go, we can change the strategy. Councillor Jeffries, did you want to kind of wrap up discussions with a bit of a summary?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, colleagues, and thank you for all the questions and the observations and everything. I was very keen to have this discussion with you guys at ONS before we took it to Cabinet and agreed it, because getting the widest possible spread of views and opinions and eyes on this is important, because it is probably one of the most important aspects of West Cheltenham. We know that there's going to be jobs, we know there's going to be economic benefits, we know all of the things that you can really see and we'll see roll out, but actually the social value and how we can transform lives, and so our poorest communities, not just on the periphery of the development, but across the town, is probably one of the most important aspects of my portfolio. So I really am grateful for all of your comments and questions, some really interesting insights that we hadn't really even thought of, I think, as a team. Even the negative one that we have to continually work on, I think, to change those perceptions. Also, while I've got the mic, I just want to put on record my thanks to the team behind the scenes, because it's only part of the team, and Amy's driven it forwards. Thank you, Amy. There's obviously the HBD aspect of that aren't here this evening that also put a lot of hard work in for us. So thank you, Chair.
It's been really cool. Thank you so much. And we'll probably be in further contact as well, because in some ways it feels a bit like my brain's buzzing a bit with like different things that, you know, we might want to kind of like participate on and like collaborate with. So I don't want to swamp you with it right now, but it'd be really good to kind of keep discussing it and just like keep it quite high on our agenda. And again, just making sure that we as councillors and acting as like a signposting agent, really, if you're happy to tell us things that you feel like it would be beneficial for members of our ward to be aware of, we'd be really excited to kind of share news about that, just to keep people as informed as possible. I think that the landscape changing quite a lot. We just want to make sure that it's pertinent and relevant as well, and people aren't being left behind. So that would be really, really cool to be a part of it. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming today. It's been really cool. If you wanted to leave now, you're allowed to do that. Just to clarify. Thank you. So moving on to item 9, which is 2025-26 General Fund and Housing Revenue Account Budget Proposals. So our objective here is receiving an update from the chair of the Budget Scrutiny Working Group on the group's response to the 2025-26 General Fund and HRA interim budget proposals. So I would really like to invite Councillor Bamford again, welcome back, just to address ONS. If you are happy to, that'd be great. Thank you. Should I have made them stay? It was me, genuinely. It was something I said.
Right. So pretty much as soon as I got onto this committee, I found myself as the chair. So I'm kind of learning on the job, I think. I have got some background in local government accountancy, but for a very long time ago, and the system was very, very different then. So as I say, it's a new experience for me, really. Trying to tease out exactly what the role of the committee is. I mean, in the 1 or 2 meetings we've had so far, we've been more of a financial monitoring scrutiny group, if that makes sense. But obviously this time round, it's a slightly different role. And I think, well, the whole committee was really learning what we could and couldn't do last Thursday, precisely what our role was. I mean, I put, 15 of those marquee things into us to talk to query items on in the report that Gemma and John had prepared, and Paul, I'm sure, was heavily involved as well. But I think it's worth reflecting to start with that they won't have made any technical mistakes. I'm very confident of that. So I don't think that's our role, because I'm very confident that that we have a very good process already in place for that sort of thing. I think it should be more, if trying to get to the bottom of exactly what our role is, it should be more about a rather more strategic look at it. And I'm very grateful for Paul to standing in for Alicia at the last minute. More than capable of replacement, but it would have been very, very helpful. Actually, I'm sad that Peter and Rowena have left, because it really would have been helpful, I think, to have somebody from the cabinet there, because a lot of the issues were not about how the reports, the HRA report and the General Fund report have been prepared. As I say, I think there's very little to worry about on that regard. It was much more about why we'd arrived at certain decisions. Damn, she just missed a bit. I won't repeat myself. Anyway, in the end, we focus, I think, and we've got Chris here and Paul who are there, and so if I get this wrong, please say I'm on the hoof. We focus primarily on what is page? Oh, I don't know what page number it is. It's the budget savings and additional income page. We spent a lot of time looking at that, essentially line by line, trying to tease out whether or not, well, how green, amber, and red everything was, I suppose, and whether or not the assumptions that were being made were risky or conservative, and how and what sort of impact that would have on the budget if they turned out to not to come to fruition in the way that is currently planned. And the other thing we spent a lot of time talking about was interest rates. And whenever you write a report, you, as in Paul, Gemma and John, write a report, it's a point in time. You can only look at what the situation is then and try and predict the future based on what you've got in front of you at that time. If you do it again the following week, it'll change. And so this report was written probably 2 or 3 weeks ago, finalised. And there you go. So, and if you looked at the news today, there was further suggestion that actually interest rates may well struggle to come down anytime soon. I think we covered off those points pretty well. Chris at Council Day is meeting with Gemma to run through a number of outstanding concerns next week, and they will then be reflected in Paul's report to the council in his Section 25 report. Those items can be those concerns items can be reflected in that final report, which we can discuss at council. So that really wasn't part of our discussion. In the end, we effectively parked that and noted that I think there was adequate provision should things not be as favourable as when we looked at it at the end of November they might seem to have been. Similarly, I think our conclusion of the run through the savings and savings plan and additional income plan was that there were some uncertainties, there were some things that might slip, but we had sufficient backup built into the budget in terms of what we plan to put into reserves, that should things go awry, we were not going to find ourselves in a thoroughly bad position. I mean, I think it's a tremendous reflection on Paul and his team, how relatively healthy our financial position is. As I was talking about earlier, things in the public sector are one hell of a lot worse than they were, certainly when I was involved in local authorities. My goodness me, we had times of plenty at that point, and we've faced local authorities and the NHS, as I discussed earlier, have faced a pretty horrid time of it over recent years. So the fact that we find ourselves in what I think the committee concluded was a relatively comfortable position with a relatively sound budget is a reflection, a great reflection on the council and its officers. The meeting was only last Thursday evening, and so any formal notes are very new. Rhiann did prepare something for us today. I think have you had a chance to look through that, Paul? Yeah. So it's only a few paragraphs. I will read it to you. You obviously haven't got it in front of you. That's because it is so hot off the press. The Budget Scrutiny Working Group met with Paul Jones and Devon Bell to review the draft HRA and General Fund budgets. Review and feedback provided to this committee forms part of the consultation on the draft budgets. Cabinet will use this feedback to prepare a final budget that will be presented to Council in February. Councillor Day is having a further meeting with Gemma Bell to discuss a number of areas in more detail, and that's specifically around interest rates. The working group discussion identified, one, the difficulty of achieving the savings target for 25-26. And I should point out that at this point, we had this incredibly ambitious 2.7 million savings target. And I think we've done a fantastic job to get as close to that. And, you know, the target for next year is still ambitious, but I don't think anything like so draconian, if you like, as this year. The need was stressed for specifics on how the money will be saved, identified and agreed. Well, that's that plan really there, isn't it? In particular, the 150k listed under a review of discretionary services needs greater clarity from the Cabinet. It was noted that savings from the decision on the HRC is not included within this total amount. That's the environmental services review line, isn't it? We're talking about there. The working group discussed whether it was better to set a more realistic target for savings and payment into reserves from a financial and political perspective. Well, that's kind of what I just described earlier. Concern was raised that the proposed contribution to the general reserves may be optimistic due to external challenges discussed. Recommended that the draft budget proposals be reviewed before the final report to recognise that circumstances outside the Council's control have moved since the report was originally written. These issues will be discussed with the lead member for Finance and Assets, and pending feedback from the Cabinet may be reflected in the final General Fund budget proposal for 25-26. So I was just mentioning earlier, Rowena, that for future years, it really would be very helpful to have somebody from the Cabinet there. Unfortunately, Alicia couldn't make it because she was unwell at the last minute. But really, a lot of the discussion needed that sort of input. It would have been certainly, helped us conclude on a number of items, particularly around savings proposals, which officers are obviously aware, but they're ultimately Cabinet decisions. So just to note for future years. Okay, I think I'll shut up there and I'll invite questions.
Councillor Hay, would you like to respond to that and then maybe receive questions from Councillor Pinniger following on from that? Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Councillor Joy. Councillor Bamford, I mean, because it was last minute, not well, there was no opportunity for anybody to stand in. Otherwise, had it been pre-arranged, I would have absolutely made sure that a member of Cabinet, or probably me, would have been there. But it was only at the last minute that I knew that Councillor Lewis couldn't do it. So apologies for that, but duly noted.
I just think that I was sort of trying to work out the role of that committee in the budget process, and I think that's a key part of it. So it was, I appreciate with circumstances contrived against us. And Paul was a very able deputy.
Councillor Pinniger, if you want to go ahead.
Thank you, Councillor Bamford. That was very interesting. So it changes the focus of what's before us today, because it sounds a bit more like we're scrutinising budget scrutiny than we are scrutinising the budget. You know, are you doing a good job? So what I got from it was that you're recognising the story and the numbers and promoting to the cabinet and leadership anything that needs guidance or further examination, so that we get a good budget. I hope that's fair. Right, so the savings page, I didn't find a key for the colours. Would the colours like, it's green if we're going to be able to do it, amber if we're not sure, and red if we don't think we'll get it. I couldn't quite work that out. And then finally, I was hoping someone might explain the sort of is it national? I've seen it on Cheltenham Facebook as well. The grumbling about Cheltenham pension contributions, which are high, and I know it's part of the plan. But that's my question.
Well, on the pensions, Paul will give you all the detail, but it's completely absurd. You know, you have reviews of pension funds on a regular basis. The shortfall is absolutely nothing to do with the revenue position of the council, and to compare councils in the way that was done in that table it's irresponsible. and there was some. If you read next door, you would want to, you know, smash the computer. Frankly, it was that irritating, and well, I found it that irritating. Heavens knows what Paul did. So now, in terms of what our role and what your role is, I think that's a very good question, and I think we're working on it. Is what I'd say. Yeah. Sorry, not to be more specific.
Were you able to commentate on the colour coding as well? And Paul, did you want to? Paul can answer that. Yeah, if that's okay, that'd be great.
Okay, let's address the pensions in the first one. So I'm just going to say it as it is, really. A really poor journalism. I mean, for anyone that's got any financial integrity, it's impossible to spend 106% of your council tax income on pension contributions, as was reported in the case of Basingstoke. It's also irresponsible to suggest that the only form of income that a council gets is council tax, because actually we're a £100 million turnover business if you bring everything together, and council tax makes up about 10 million of that, so 10% of that overall turnover. And as many of you will know, because I've come and given an update on pensions, we've got a specific strategy here, and we must not confuse cash flow with budget. So what's been reported in the Times as Cheltenham's contribution is 3 financial years worth of pension contributions, which we made a budgetary decision to do, to pay it as an upfront payment. So let's not confuse cash flow with budget. So it's actually, so the reported figure is 3 times the actual amount. And the benefits of doing so is that from 2026, this council will be making a reduction in pension contributions of £2 million per annum. So it was a strategy that's been in place since 2016. The Times reporter, because he did come back for clarification, was given that clarification and deliberately chose to ignore that clarification to give the true context. So it's pure journalism to get a headline story, and anybody that manages a bank account, which is pretty much everybody in this room, and I hope everyone that's reading will realise that it's absolutely impossible to spend 106% of council tax on pension contributions. And dare I say it, because I wouldn't want to insult the taxpayers of Cheltenham's intelligence. But if we were seriously spending 75% of our council tax on pension contributions, how on earth do they think that we fund all of the services that they receive, whether that's the collection of the bins, the upkeep of the parks, and the many other services that we provide? So that's my rant over in terms of that particular journalism. Moving to the green, amber, red, it's quite subjective. The way that we assess it is anything that's green, everything's in place, that will be delivered. So we've already, whether it's a contractual arrangement or a decision has been made. So to all intents and purposes, using my phrases, the money is banked, the saving is banked. Where we have amber, there are plans in place. So if we just take the EV charging, so we've got the contractual arrangements, but there may well be hold-ups in terms of the connectivity. I'm making it sort of simple, but in terms of actually linking up the EV charging to the actual source of supply, so that that's why it's amber, because there may be a timing issue in terms of whether the full year. With the red, it's our assessment that no clear plans are yet in place or decisions made in terms of how those are assessed. And then from my perspective, because obviously I have a statutory duty under the Section 25 report, I have to do an assessment of the adequacy of reserves and balances. And so I will always make an assessment to include anything that's deemed amber anything that's deemed red in the budget assessment.
Can I just come back on the role of the two committees? I've just had a further thought on that, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course, and then we'll take questions to Councillor Day just afterwards. Thank you.
Yeah. So we weren't looking to scrutinise the decision to make savings, or the operational reasons behind how these figures were arrived at. We were simply looking at effectively the reasonableness of the timing. So we for instance, the HRC, we didn't have a report in front of us about how that decision had been arrived at, or we weren't scrutinising that decision in any way. We were accepting it and commenting on its impact on the budget in terms of timing and so forth. So this committee may want to scrutinise that in some other way. I don't know. But that's not part of VSWD as we saw it.
Adrian, Claire can do it. Would it be helpful for Claire to provide some clarity over the specific operations of budget scrutiny?
So yes, just hopefully might bring a bit of clarity. So as part of the sort of budget consultation process, ONS are obviously required to input into that through as part of the scrutiny of the budget. The way that it works in Cheltenham, and quite common actually in many authorities, is that you have a subgroup, which is your budget scrutiny working group, that look at that and do all of the kind of legwork for you. So they're a subgroup of the wider committee that's special. So for example, when we have a task and finish group that looks at a specific project, this is a group that specifically looks at the budget for you rather than the whole committee having to do it. So you have a working group that do that on your behalf. So you're not really having to scrutinise that subgroup. They are part of this committee and reporting in the work that they do for your information, really. And you can obviously ask questions, but that's what the role is. Does that help?
Yeah, that helps. But it means that the executive summary that we were given is the executive summary of the HRA and the general budget. We should have been given an executive summary of what the scrutiny group looked at. So maybe next time we can be given the correct summary. Just want to say to Paul, I know I asked you 10 questions earlier and then honed it down to 4. I'll ask those on Wednesday because they're all about the HRA, and the Cabinet Housing Committee is on Wednesday, so I'll bring those back rather than spend time here. Thanks.
Councillor Day, did you have a question you'd like to ask?
To be honest, it's not really a question. It's really just to echo Paul's comments about this substandard, irresponsible piece of journalism about the pension scheme. Coming from a financial background myself, which clearly the journalist responsible doesn't, I would just say that any business operating what is called a defined benefit pension scheme, which the council has, would give their eyes teeth for their pension scheme to be in the funding position that our council's scheme is today, and the contributions, that Paul was referring to have played a part in that, and that our residents can be well assured that we've got a very strong pension scheme that is actually going to be a big help, in terms of the future cash flow and the costs to the council. So it was a terrible piece of journalism, totally misleading.
I think it is frustrating because I know that there can be tensions between local authorities and the residents that we seek to represent. And I understand that sometimes financial planning can seem a little bit opaque, but I think in some ways this isn't helpful because it makes our jobs quite challenging. And we do ultimately have a legal obligation to take care of our staff members at CBC, and a pension plan is an integral part of that. So it's just frustrating that when we're perceived to have messed up, that we get quite a lot of backlash about that, even though it's not necessarily taking things in context. So and you can't necessarily prove a negative either. How are we actually supposed to sit down everyone who's worried about this and explain to them in detail about the decisions that we've made over several years to put this together? And this, in some ways it is valuable to have a budget scrutiny working group who can report in and actually just try to, do systematic updates throughout the year as well, just so that we do have that continual, external eye on the running total. We are trying to hold ourselves accountable. I would want to reassure people that we are doing our best. It's only that, all it takes is one media outlet who wants to drive traffic by having a glamorous and, alarming story. They're not without their motivations to do that. So, and that puts us at a specific disadvantage and makes it harder to do our jobs. So, it's not very much appreciated. It can be quite destructive. It's just frustrating, really. Does anyone have any further questions about the budget scrutiny's oversight in this matter, or any other feedback from ways you'd like the group to function? Because I've been vice chairing since the early summer, so we're already interested in making sure that we're meeting the needs of ONS since we're acting on your behalf. Does anyone have any ideas about what you'd like to see in time to come, or any suggestions? Because even if it's not now, you can have a bit of a think about what you'd like to include in that remit, because we want to work together. I'm assuming that Councillor Bamford would hopefully be in agreement with me. Does that sound feasible to you as well, or is there anything you'd like to say on it?
Yeah, I don't think I'd properly appreciated that we were a sub, effectively, of this group. But so that's useful to know. But yeah, obviously, I think guidance as to precisely what our remit is would be and I think it to some extent there is some flexibility there. We meet 4 times a year. We'll obviously be monitoring the financial position primarily, but I guess there may be other items that we could consider. I suppose that there is a bit of a question around the savings plan. Is it this group that scrutinises that, or are we doing it on your behalf? I don't know.
I think budget scrutiny do it on ONS's behalf specifically, so it's kind of outsourcing for simplicity, really.
We did it to some extent. Whether we did it as thoroughly as we should, we can consider outside this meeting.
Thank you so much for all of your engagement with this. I think I'm quite happy to wrap things up now on that point of discussion. So thank you so much, Paul, and thank you so much, Councillor Bamford, for going through that with us. And it's something that we can just be more generally aware of. I think that it's useful having that annual check-in, but it could be good to have some some mechanism for having more regular check-ins, just to make sure that we're receiving the right sort of updates and around the right sort of timescale. So I'll put some thought into that and sort of see if there's actually easy ways of doing that to just make everyone better informed. So that could be really good. So I think just moving on to item 10, updates from scrutiny task groups. We don't have any active task groups at the moment, so we don't necessarily have anything to report on that. But I just wanted to touch base on item 11 with the review of the scrutiny work plans. So, Councillor Allen, do you have any suggestions for it there?
Yes, yeah, with regards to item 11, I was wondering if there'd be a report or an update on the HRC, because in the last scrutiny meeting, we mentioned that there would be an update in the new year. But on the forward work plan, I can't see that this has been indicated at all. I don't know if this was going to be a verbal update or a written one, so any clarity would be appreciated. Thank you.
No, of course, thank you. I think we've, with everything happening with the devolution white paper, I mean, of course, it's still an urgent issue with the HRC, but I think that there's been a lot of time taken up with that. I think that we've asked Councillor Hay if it's possible to have an HRC update. I don't know if you have anything ready for us today, or if we can leave it till the next meeting. Are you in a position to do it if it's not too much trouble? Sorry.
I didn't get my coat on fast enough, did I? Sorry. I mean, to be frank, it actually only closed on Friday, so no, there isn't an update. And I mean, it's with Councillor Telford had a break and was poorly, so I'm sure that he will be updating everybody, because he's very keen to do that, about next steps. I mean, I think the process was clearly set out. Sadly, what I would say is that I wrote to the County Council on the decision of council, and wrote to them to ask them to support. I know that the County Council leader has responded to Councillor Wilkinson, to our MP, Max Wilkinson, but I haven't actually had a response from them, which I have chased now twice. So from the beginning of December council, the cabinet meeting, which was the request to them to get round the table to see discussions. To be fair, I guess, like us, or like myself, they've probably had other things on the agenda since the 19th of December, when the white paper came out, and then the week before that on planning. But I will ensure that that I'll pass that message or request on to Councillor Telford.
Thank you so much, because we could request a briefing note potentially from Councillor Telford to be included in the next ONS meeting. Do you feel like that might be feasible for us to include? And Councillor Allen, would you be satisfied with something like that?
Yes, absolutely. And also just to say, I'm very appreciative of the fact that not only have you had to deal with the government white paper and also the changes to planning as well, but I'm also aware that the recycling centre just shut. It wasn't so much a request to have the invitation now, it was more, I was just wondering why there was an absence in the work plan. I should have made that a bit more clear, apologies. It wasn't to expect one just yet, so I do appreciate the time limits, but yes, a briefing note would be great, thank you.
To take full accountability for it, it was my bad chairing, because I'd already been in contact with Councillor Hay to request, as part of your updates at the beginning of the meeting, if we could have a HRC updates as well included, and I didn't actually remind you of that this time. So we are definitely aiming to have updates every meeting from Councillor Hay when she's doing leaders briefings. So that will be something that is included henceforth, and I will ensure that I'm being clear enough on what the priority of that is. I think it's just with the devolution white paper, I got so absorbed into all of that, so I was just drifting away. So thank you for holding me accountable on that. We'll try and make sure that that's prioritised going ahead. Councillor Hay, is there anything else you'd like to add on that, or are you fairly happy with?
No, I think I can do an update, Councillor Joy, but it may be better if it's a written update that's given from Councillor Telford rather than me, because whilst I have oversight, he has the detail at the tip of his fingers.
So to speak. Okay, that's really cool. So if it's okay to minute that we would be very happy to receive like routine briefing notes from Councillor Telford, just so that we're kept informed, and also the fact, again, with our liaison with the public happening very routinely, it's useful for us being informed and just to have that information shared. So if he's happy to share what he's happy for us to share in turn, that would be really, really helpful and just help things operate more smoothly. So Just a bit of a, refresher on what we're going to be planning for the 24th of February, which is our next meeting. We're going to be looking at reconciling the challenges of heritage protection with sustainability measures. We'll be looking at the Sports and Physical Activity Action Plan and a review of our collections development policy, which is to say our museum collections. So if you wanted to have a bit of a think about ways you could, participate in discussions about that, ask any questions, that would be really cool. If you're happy, Councillor Allen, with us having updates from Councillor Tailford in terms of the HRC, if anyone else has any other ideas about what to incorporate into the work plan, we're always happy to talk about it. I'm very interested in that. Councillor Pinniger, is there anything you'd like to add?
Yes, I'm currently in a dialogue with Richard Simmons about the split between the pitches strategy and the sport and activity plan, which has shut off any options for us to repurpose parts of the King George V playing fields, because the strategy is split across two documents, and I don't know what the answer to that is, but because it's written in one, it can't be affected by the other and vice versa. So we need to work out how to improve the way we provide facilities for activity to the local community, and it's not just pitches for the whole of Cheltenham.
I think that's a really cracking question and something that it would be useful to get a resolution on. Do you guys feel like that might be possible, to invite one extra person in relation to it? We could definitely have a look into it. We may not have an answer right now. Of course. Would you mind just emailing myself and Councillor Chellin alongside Democratic Services and Claire, so that we can have a look at the specific people we would need to invite, and just see, because we'd have to check if they're available the next time. So it does require some putting together of different elements and, making sure that it's scheduled correctly. But if you do have any other questions, then, they can be submitted ahead of time, just so that anyone involved can prepare for them. So does that sound okay? Well, if you send us a proposal, then we can consider that. Does that sound all right? Okay, that's class. Thank you so much. Okay, so I will see you guys. Well, item number 12 is any other item that Chair determines to be urgent, and unfortunately in this case it's me going home and having my tea. So the date of the next meeting is going to be 24th of February, not 27th, 24th. The meeting on the 3rd of February is going to be cancelled, so please don't come to it. There will not be anyone there. So I'm looking forward to seeing you guys on the 24th, and have a lovely week. Take care. Thanks.